Welcome to Kieu Dung channel. If this is your first time here, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share to support me in creating more meaningful videos. Today, we step into a quiet yet powerful story about Luyen, a woman of strength, resilience, and a heart that never stops giving. In the quiet early morning, when the sun had not yet risen and the world was still wrapped in a thin blanket of mist, the garden looked as if it was covered in soft silver dew. Every leaf, every branch glistened gently under the pale light of dawn. Through this peaceful scene, Luyen walked slowly toward the familiar orchard, the place she often came to whenever she needed a little extra income to care for her young daughter, Kieu. The owner of the garden greeted her with a warm, understanding smile. After a few gentle words, Luyen asked for permission to harvest some ripe dragon fruits to sell at the market. She hoped that today's work, though simple and tiring, would bring in enough money to buy her daughter new notebooks and a few small necessities for the coming week. With a small knife in her hand, she stepped to the first row of dragon fruit trees. The thick green stems, covered in soft thorns, held up bright red fruits, colors of hope, effort, and life. She bent down carefully, cupping each fruit in her palm, turning it slightly, then cutting it with a clean, practiced motion. Each dragon fruit, smooth, cool, and perfectly round, fell gently into her hand like tiny blessings from the land. From row to row, Luyen moved tirelessly. Her back curved, her shoulders working, her hair slipping loose from its tie with every breeze, yet she kept going, her eyes scanning each branch, seeking only the ripest, fullest fruits. The morning sun slowly broke through the mist, shining across her tanned skin, turning each drop of sweat into a sparkling bead of light. Birds chirped softly above her, as though cheering her on during this humble but meaningful labor. The old bamboo basket at her side gradually filled layer by layer with red, glowing dragon fruits. The basket, worn by years of use, had followed her through countless mornings like this. When it was finally full, she placed her hands on the basket and gently shook it to settle the fruits, making sure none would bruise on the journey. She sat down for a moment under a nearby tree, catching her breath. Her hands, darkened by sun and work, brushed away the dust on the basket. Though fatigue showed on her face, her eyes carried a soft spark, the quiet joy of a mother who knew she had done one more thing for her child. Then, slowly, she lifted the basket and secured it onto her back. The weight pressed against her shoulders, but she did not complain. She had long been used to carrying heavy things, both on her body and on her heart. Standing upright, she inhaled deeply, taking in the scent of earth, fruit, and the fresh morning air. And then she began to walk. Her steps were steady, gentle, but filled with determination. Down the small dirt path leading toward the market, she carried not only a basket full of dragon fruits, but also the quiet hope of giving her daughter, little Kieu, a better future. Every step she took whispered the same silent promise. A mother will do anything, absolutely anything, for her child. The gentle wind swept along the dusty road, carrying with it the scent of earth and the soft rustle of fallen leaves. As Luyen stepped out of the car, her heart trembled slightly under James's quiet kindness. He stood beside her, his gaze warm, almost as if he wished he could shoulder every hardship she had ever endured. When the basket was placed on the scale, James carefully brushed off the dust clinging to its rim, then turned to her with a gentle smile, one that made her shyly lower her eyes. In the busy morning market, the two of them stood close, saying little, yet the silence between them felt tender, as if their hearts were quietly reaching for each other once more. Standing together on the edge of the lush green meadow, James gently reached for Sung Luyen's hand. She didn't pull away. Their fingers intertwined naturally, as if they had always belonged there. For a brief moment, the world felt quiet. Just the wind brushing through the tall grass and the soft warmth of his hand in hers. They looked at each other, not speaking, yet understanding every unspoken feeling that had lingered between them for so long. After a while, they began strolling through the open field, talking about their lives, about the long days, the silent nights, the burdens they carried, and the moments of hope that kept them moving forward. They exchanged stories of longing, of the people they missed, of dreams they were still holding on to. Every word brought them closer, every smile eased something in their hearts. Soon, their conversation turned playful. James challenged her to a little game, and before she could protest, he darted away across the grass. Laughing, she ran after him, the two of them chasing each other through the meadow like children freed from every worry. Their laughter echoed across the field, light, honest, full of life. When he finally slowed down, she caught up, lightly tapping his shoulder in triumph. They both burst into happy laughter, cheeks flushed with joy. After those precious minutes of play and heartfelt sharing, they walked back to the car together. The air around them was warm with renewed connection, something gentle, something real. James opened the door for her, and once they were both inside, he started the engine. They set off again, this time with a shared purpose. Ahead of them was the home of a woman they had once helped during a difficult time. She had struggled alone, and both James and Sung Luyen had stepped in when she needed support most. As the car rolled forward, Sung Luyen looked out the window and softly said, "People should always help one another." James nodded, glancing at her with quiet admiration. "That's what makes life meaningful," he replied. James and Sung Luyen stepped out of the car and began walking down the narrow dirt path that led to the small home of the single mother they had once helped. The place was humble, surrounded by a few flowering bushes and a wooden fence that had been patched many times, yet it felt warm and full of life. As they approached the front yard, the door suddenly swung open. The woman rushed out with a bright smile, waving both hands in excitement. "Oh, you're here! I'm so glad to see you," she called out, her voice trembling with genuine gratitude. James greeted her with a gentle nod, while Sung Luyen moved forward to give her a warm, supportive hug. She held her tightly, as if embracing someone she deeply trusted. When they pulled away, she placed her hands on Sung Luyen's arms and said softly, "You both always bring light to this home." They walked together to the small seating area in the yard, just a wooden table and a few bamboo chairs under the shade of a guava tree. As they settled down, the breeze carried the scent of fresh leaves, making the space feel peaceful and comforting. James asked first, his tone caring, "How have you been? Are you managing well these days?" The woman nodded, though her smile carried traces of exhaustion. "Life is still hard," she admitted, "but it's better than before. Thanks to your help, I've been able to take things one step at a time." Sung Luyen leaned forward, her voice full of concern. "Your health, are you feeling stronger? You look a bit thinner." The woman chuckled lightly, waving her hand. "I'm fine, truly. I just work a lot, but seeing the two of you here today, that makes me feel much better." Her eyes softened as she looked at both of them. Then she paused for a moment, as though gathering the courage to say something she had been thinking about for a long time. "You know," she began gently, "I've watched how you care for each other, and I've seen the way James looks at you, Luyen." She smiled warmly. "I truly hope the two of you will come together soon." Sung Luyen's cheeks grew warm, and she quickly glanced away while James blinked in surprise, then smiled shyly. The woman continued, her tone sincere. "Kieu Dung deserves a strong, loving family. She deserves a father's affection and a mother's embrace. And you," she turned to James, "would give that little girl the future she needs." James looked at Sung Luyen, his expression gentle, almost protective. Luyen lowered her gaze, but her heart felt full of hope, full of fear, full of something she hadn't let herself dream of for a long time. The three of them talked longer, about life, about hardship, about the strength of being there for one another. Laughter mixed with heartfelt moments, creating a warmth in the air that felt like home. When the sun began to dip slightly, James reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small envelope. He handed it to the woman with both hands, treating her with the respect she deserved. "This is just a little something," he said softly. "Use it for your health, your home, whatever you need." The woman's eyes filled with tears. She shook her head at first, overwhelmed, but James gave her a reassuring smile. "Please," he said, "you're not alone." Finally, she accepted it with trembling hands. "Thank you," she whispered. "May your kindness return to you 100 times." After a few more words of affection, they stood up together. The woman hugged them both, holding on to them as if holding on to hope itself. As the sky shifted into the soft colors of late afternoon, James and Sung Luyen finally returned to her home, nestled high in the mountains. The path leading up was lined with tall pine trees, their branches swaying gently in the cold wind. Winter was settling in, the kind of chill that made people draw closer together. When they reached the front of her small wooden house, neither of them let go of the other's hand. Their fingers remained intertwined, warm in the midst of the cooling air. It felt as if releasing that touch would put an end to a moment both of them had been waiting for far too long. They stood there for a while, simply looking at the quiet mountains around them. The breeze rustled through the leaves and grasses, creating a soft melody that wrapped around the two of them. James brushed a loose strand of hair away from her cheek, and she looked up at him with gentle eyes. Eyes that held gratitude, hesitation, and something tender that she was finally beginning to accept. Sung Luyen led him to the small bamboo bench beside the house. They sat down, shoulder to shoulder, the old bamboo creaking lightly beneath them. The cold wind swept past, but neither of them felt it. Not when James slipped his arm around her and she leaned into his chest, resting her head near his heartbeat. For a moment, neither of them spoke. They simply breathed together, feeling the warmth of the other. The world felt quiet, peaceful, as if the mountains themselves were giving them the blessing they had never dared to ask for. After a while, Sung Luyen whispered, her voice soft and filled with emotion. "It feels like everything I wished for is finally within reach." James tightened his arm around her slightly, his voice steady and warm. "You deserve happiness, Luyen. You and Kieu Dung both. And if you'll allow me, I want to be part of that happiness." She closed her eyes, letting his words settle into her heart. For years she had carried life alone, working, sacrificing, enduring. But now, sitting there with him, under the cold winds of the changing season, she felt something she had almost forgotten, the feeling of being cared for, cherished, and not having to face the world alone. The wind continued to sway the branches above them, and the late sunlight washed gently over the mountains. On that bamboo bench, wrapped in each other's warmth, they felt the quiet promise of a future, one built not from fear or hardship, but from love, understanding, and the hope of something beautiful finally beginning. Dusk slowly settled over the mountains, painting the sky in deep shades of violet and fading gold. The air grew colder with every passing minute, and Luyen looked toward her small wooden house, then back at James. Her voice was gentle, almost hesitant, yet filled with longing. "James, would you stay here tonight?" she asked softly. "It's quiet here. Too quiet when I'm alone. Kieu is away at school, and sometimes the nights feel endless." James met her gaze, understanding the loneliness behind her words. He nodded without hesitation. "Of course," he said warmly. "I'll stay." A shy, relieved smile lit her face. They gathered small pieces of wood and lit a fire outside the house. The flames crackled gently, casting a warm glow on their faces as they sat close together. The night around them was silent, except for the soft calls of insects and the distant hooting of an owl. Wrapped in the fire's warmth, they talked about everything, their worries, their dreams, and the quiet ache of missing the ones they loved. As the night grew late, the cold deepened. They stepped inside the house, where a small oil lamp cast flickering shadows across the room. The single bed in the corner looked warm, though humble. Respectful and gentle, they lay down on opposite sides, each keeping to their own space. There was only one thick blanket. James immediately pushed it toward her. "You take it," he insisted, but she shook her head, placing it between them. In the end, James pulled a thin blanket from the corner of the room and wrapped it over himself, pretending it was enough. Hours later, the wind outside howled against the walls. The cold seeped into the room. Luyen stirred, half awake, and glanced over. She saw James curled up slightly, the thin blanket offering little warmth. Her heart ached. Quietly, she sat up and pulled the thick blanket over him. She watched him for a moment, his face calm in sleep, before taking a spare cloth and covering herself. Exhaustion soon pulled her into slumber. Sometime after midnight, James awoke. The cold bit at his skin, but what caught his attention was the sight of Luyen huddled under nothing more than a thin cloth. A soft tenderness welled in his chest. Without a word, he lifted the blanket and draped it back over her carefully, making sure her shoulders were warm. She murmured in her sleep, leaning unconsciously into the heat. James lay back down, closer this time, listening to the wind rage outside, yet feeling a quiet, growing warmth inside his heart. The next morning, the sky was still wrapped in a pale gray mist. The mountains were quiet, half asleep beneath the early light. James woke before dawn, careful not to disturb Luyen as she continued to rest peacefully. Stepping outside, he breathed in the crisp, icy air. His breath turned into small clouds as he knelt beside the fire pit and began gathering dry twigs. Within moments, a gentle flame flickered to life, warming his hands and casting a golden glow across the yard. The cold bit at his fingertips, but the fire softened it. He reached for the small metal kettle and filled it with water from the clay jar. Setting it over the flames, he watched as the fire licked the bottom of the kettle, slowly bringing it to a simmer. He knew how cold the mountain mornings could be, and how important a bit of hot water was for washing up and starting the day. As the first thin lines of sunlight stretched across the horizon, James rubbed his hands together, warming them before returning to the house, hoping to have everything ready for Song Luyen when she woke. When the morning light finally brightened the sky, Song Luyen slowly opened her eyes. The weight of yesterday's work still lingered in her body, but the peaceful silence around her made waking up feel gentle. There were no horns, no city noise, only the soft whisper of the wind brushing through the trees and the distant song of mountain birds greeting the new day. As she sat up, James immediately stepped inside, his expression warm and full of quiet care. "You slept well?" he asked softly, walking toward her. Before she could answer, he gently adjusted the collar of her coat, making sure it covered her neck against the morning chill. His hands were steady, thoughtful, full of a tenderness that made her heart flutter. Then he reached for the small wooden comb he had found on her table. "Let me," he said with a smile. He stood behind her, slowly brushing through her long, slightly tangled hair. Each movement was gentle, as though he feared pulling too hard or hurting her in the slightest. The simple act, so calm, so intimate, spoke louder than any words he could have said. It was care, devotion, and affection woven together in the quiet of dawn. Once he finished, he stepped outside and returned with the kettle of hot water he had prepared earlier. Without hesitation, he carried it toward the small outdoor washing area. He poured the steaming water carefully into a wooden bucket, then added cold water little by little until the temperature was just warm enough, not too hot, not too cold. "Luyen," he called softly. "The water's ready. Come brush your teeth." She smiled shyly, stepping outside. James handed her the bamboo cup, watching to make sure she was comfortable. When she finished, he took a clean cloth, soaked it in warm water, wrung it out, and gently pressed it to her cheeks. "Here, let me help you," he murmured. He wiped her face with slow, tender strokes, as though he were handling something precious. The warmth of the cloth mixed with the warmth of his touch, leaving her heart quietly trembling. No one had cared for her like this, so thoughtfully, so gently, in many years. After they finished washing up, the two of them returned to the small kitchen area where the fire still burned softly. They sat side by side, warming their hands, letting the morning settle around them. For a moment, it felt like they were already a family. Two people starting a simple day together. But the moment could not last forever. James glanced toward the mountain path, his expression turning a little apologetic. "I need to go," he said quietly. "There's work waiting for me at the construction site." Song Luyen lowered her eyes, trying to hide the small ache in her chest. "I understand," she whispered. They walked outside together. The wind brushed past them, carrying with it the scent of pine and cold earth. When he turned to leave, he hesitated for a moment, then gently squeezed her hand as though promising he would return. She watched him walk down the narrow path until his figure disappeared behind the trees. The yard felt emptier instantly. Only the wind and the sound of birds remained. Song Luyen stood there for a long moment, hands clasped, heart warm yet aching, already longing for the next time she would see him again. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next episode.